Welcome to the Keeping It Real podcast by Real World Academy, where we hear from top educators, entrepreneurs, and creative thinkers on how to design your future. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Keeping It Real podcast by Real World Academy. I'm Domenico Randazzo, the Chief Operating Officer at Real World Academy, and I'm here with my cousin, Dr. Anthony Longo, who's a co-founder and the head of community outreach. And in this podcast, we bring on people from all different walks of life, different professions, different passions, in order to find out the best way for young people to ultimately design their lives and design a future for themselves. And today we have on a very special guest, my close friend, Nick Ditri. He's one half of the EDM production duo Disco Fries. He's also a record label owner, a music publisher, an entrepreneur, and an investor. And we've been working together since I was a teenager. So welcome, Nick. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. Much appreciated. You guys are doing awesome stuff. Happy to be here.
Thank you, man. So I think, a good place to start would be for you to kind of inform us a little bit about your journey as an artist and as an entrepreneur, and kind of tell us about, number one, the decision you made as a young kid to ultimately pursue a life centered around music and what that must have been like, all of the kind of practicalities that went into that, and, discussions with your parents and so on and so forth. How were you able to ultimately, emerge out of college in your 20s and pursue a life of music?
So it's a very loaded question, which I'm happy to answer. So just going back a little bit, I won't give you the full bio, but I'll give you the brief. When I was about 5, my dad worked for Canon. He worked for Canon mostly his whole career, but he worked his ass off for Canon, and he wasn't the happiest. He's since retired, and he's super happy now. He's an awesome guy, as you know. But I noticed that really early when I was little. He'd come home from work at 6 after sitting in traffic all day, and it just wasn't the best lifestyle for him. And I saw that, and when I was about 5, I said to my mom, I was like, I'll never do that. I'll never work a 9 to 5. It was some kind of capacity of I'll never be like that. I don't want that life. And it was about working a 9 to 5. I always wanted to work for myself, but I didn't know what that was at that age. The only ideas I had were of working garage sales every other weekend. Growing up in an Italian house, it's like Sinatra's on and we're running a yard sale, and that's your entire summer. So, I was 6, 7 years old, just killing it at these garage sales. I'd go garbage picking with my grandfather, and we'd pick up old chairs and tables and stuff. He'd fix them up and then resell them for $10 or something at a garage sale. So I was like, all right, there's something to that. The idea of one, the art of negotiation, of saying all right, here's a $15 table. I'm going to ask for 20, and hopefully I get 15. When the guy offers me 10, I'm asking 20, we'll land at 15, and you get the amount of money you ultimately want. So there was learning the art of negotiation, learning how to generate a dollar for yourself, versus this is the concepts in the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which Domenico, your mom gave me that book. Happened.
That's right. I remember that.
Crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But these are all concepts that he talks about in that book, where it's I don't need to work for somebody else to generate money for them to then pay me. There's a way for me to work for myself and to generate this money myself.
I mean, that's a very scary decision to make as a 5-year-old. What does a parent say to their 5-year-old kid who says, I don't want to have a 9 to 5 when I grow up?
I don't even think that they thought about it at the time, but my parents were, and I give them a lot of slack for a lot of stuff just because I can, and I can Italian guilt them up one side and down the other. But I give them credit on this to the end of the earth. They were always supportive in whatever my journey was and what I was interested in. If I wanted to I wanted to play basketball on the junior varsity team in grammar school, and that was my sole mission. They're all right, well, we know our kid sucks at basketball, but we're gonna send him to basketball camp. It's what he wants to do. Let's push into whatever it is. And that became music, thankfully. So when I was about 7, I was really into music growing up, but nothing like out of the ordinary because I was always around it. But when I was 7, my grandparents and my parents were like, "Do you want to play piano?" And so on my 7th birthday, started taking piano lessons. And then when I was about 12 in middle school, I saw a DJ at the school dance. And I was like, that's awesome. And he was particularly good. He was a good DJ. Like, he was a really good DJ for that type of event. And I was like, I love the idea of this. There's something about like rocking a dance floor. The lights are cool. Like, just, I don't know. I was just thrilled by the whole idea of it. So I went back to the idea of like, how do I generate money? So I went door to door and I started cutting lawns. Of course, my parents' lawnmower, and I didn't pay for the gas, but I started cutting lawns, and I ended up making like a few $100s, enough to buy speakers and a setup. And I ended up taking that DJ's job at the school dances. I was able to like frame it in such a way to the school where I was like, listen, I go here, you're supporting a student. 2, like, I can make the music selections adhere to like whatever you guys want. And it would be a much more curated experience. So I ended up getting that gig, and it was atrocious. It was terrible. It went not well. But that's how I kind of like started getting into all this stuff. And I went on to start a hip hop record label when I was 15. But jumping back, like, the art of production and music production was kind of like the middle ground for me between this piano thing over here and this DJ thing over here that were almost like 2 separate lives, it felt like. Because I'd play piano at church on Sunday, and they paid pretty well. And then I'd go and DJ the next Friday for some like Sweet 16, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, how do I tie these together? And that was production. And the first thing I did was what I was into, which was hip hop. Eminem was huge at the time, so like my favorite artist, and Dr. Dre, and like all that stuff. I was just like heavy into it, which I still am. And I started producing hip hop, and then I brought over like some local rappers, started pressing CDs, and we'd sell the CDs at the mall. So I learned like the art of like putting your music out there and publishing, and just kind of like all these weird little things, like how to master for an album and how to get your album pressed. And it was learn as you go. I spent a bunch of money doing it, like figuring it all out. But again, like between lawn cutting, DJing, and playing piano, I was able to like self-fund it. So it was like the early beginnings of like learning how to run a business, but definitely not the not the Cornell way of learning how to run a business. It was definitely like in the streets and figuring it out.
So that's the difference though between you and I feel like a lot of other, up and coming musicians, is you had an entrepreneurial instinct, and you knew that, okay, this is what's required in order for me to sustain a living in music and not just treat it as a hobby. So what's your advice for young people who want to pursue a career in the arts, but who, maybe are a little bit squeamish about taking on those odd jobs and paying your dues and doing what's necessary from a business sense in order to make that dream a reality?
Yeah, I think there's many different ways to look at this, but for me, the advice I always go back to is you're never too good for anything, no matter what it is. But particularly if you want to be in the arts, there's a lot of shit you need to like work through until you have the privilege to say, no, I don't need that. If you want to make a career out of it, you want to make a sustainable living, you have to take on little jobs. If you're a painter and you paint amazing, huge wall-to-wall pieces of art that are incredible, but you only sell like one of those a year, you're probably going to have to take on some other painting jobs that you don't like, right, that are like, you're painting commercial storefronts and you're painting their food specials. Like, I know tons of dudes that do that like during the week, and then they create these crazy canvas works of art on the weekends. But that's the game. You got to figure out how to generate money. Now, the other way to do this is work a day job. See plenty of people work a day job, and then like the other 8 hours of the day, you're busting your ass to get your craft off the ground. If you want to do like one singular thing, make one type of singular music or art or whatever it might be in the creative space, if your sole focus is just that thing and you're not willing to take in like other projects within the space, then you're probably got to work a day job in the meantime to offset and get some of that money.
Yeah, I mean, Mozart gave piano lessons when he was super famous. So, I always like to use that as an example. What you just touched on, though, people don't teach that in art programs, if I'm going to be honest about it. People don't teach that no-nonsense work ethic that you need to have if you're a self-starter. So, and I know, I went to music school, you went to music school as well. And I feel like there's a lot of do's and don'ts of going to music school that you have to teach yourself, that the program won't inherently teach you. And one of those do's and don'ts is, really compartmentalizing your time and treating it like a finite resource and using that time to take advantage of the network that you have in college. So, what's your advice for college students, especially college students in the arts who want to network effectively in college?
And Nick, can you talk about how you met your musical partner, Danny, also in college and how that played into that as well?
Yeah, so when I went to college, it was 2004 is when I started. And freshman year, my parents were basically like, all right, you're getting out of high school. Like, we know you want to do the music thing full time, but they gave me this arbitrary ultimatum. They were like, either you go to Berkeley or whatever music program that you are going to go to, or you enlist in the military. And I was like, this is such a weird, like,
old school.
Wait, so you won't let me like just stop and drop out and make music, but like you're putting this arbitrary, like, I don't know. The whole thing was bizarre. When I think about it now, I think it's still weird, like the ultimatum, but ultimately worked out for the best. I met my musical partner, Danny, who I run our business with freshman year. We were totally opposite. We still are. He was in my dorm. He was put together as my roommate. So we had another roommate and it was the three of us in one room, and I didn't pick him. The school picked him, whatever. And then by sophomore, junior year, we started making records together and just kind of like testing the idea of dance remixes of like 80s records and kind of just tons of random thoughts around collaborating. He was into very different music than me. Radiohead, Air, stuff I love, but I wasn't listening to regularly. Just to go back, like I was listening to like straight up hip hop, underground New York shit. And he was listening to that. But our middle ground was dance records, particularly like stuff that was on late night on KTU. At the time, Tiesto was doing stuff like Adagio for strings, which we loved. It was really like classically driven, like trance stuff. So it fell in this like weird middle ground for us. And that's what we started making together. But yeah, I met him as randomly placed roommate freshman year in college.
Wow, college roommate.
So just to touch on Domenico's point of like compartmentalizing and how to think about these things with college, I spent probably way too much time thinking about like Mixolydian scales and music theory and like how am I going to get through this class and like kill it, when in reality, in hindsight, I should have spent every minute of that time networking. And I did spend a considerable amount of time networking, but now thinking it through even more and after the fact, that's where all of my attention should have gone. I should have honestly been like barely a C student and spent the rest of my time networking, because that is the value.
Yeah.
At least in an art school.
Well, I think the problem is a messaging problem. You know, art schools want to give parents the impression that, you know, you're putting your kid's future in our hands, so we're going to guide them from point A to point B. And then you get there and, you know, I don't want to make it out to be a disappointment, but, you know, you recognize the harsh reality that it's on you. It's on you in every sense of the word. It's on you if you want to perform well academically. It's on you if you want to take advantage of your internships. And it's on you ultimately If you want to pause your career until, you graduate college, then fine. But if you're not already working on developing, a sustainable situation for yourself when you are, 18, 19, 20, then especially in the arts, since it's hyper competitive and unpredictable, you're going to be screwed. So, I think one of the main points of this podcast episode in particular is teaching self-starter, young people like that, whether they're in the arts or not, how do you set yourself up? How do you set yourself up on an independent basis? How do you get your social media brand in check? How do you develop that network over time? And how do you ultimately discover what you want? Because that's another issue. A lot of times art students don't know who they are and don't know what they want. So, maybe that resonated with you in some way. Is there any advice you would give to yourself looking back at that time as a music student in terms of what you would do quickly or differently?
Yes, there is. And along like everything you just said, you touched on a lot of valuable topics there. But thinking back, I think the most valuable thing that I would think about is not to follow the narrative of the school or the greater narrative of what the parent wants or the teacher wants or what the school wants and what their mission is. You have an innate path and a narrative here that you need to follow, and what are going to be the action items and tools within that school that you can use to action on your own narrative.
Right.
Because the school is going to want to graduate the A student who's the most successful, if it's a music school that wins the Grammy. But your narrative might be, I want to, and I know we've talked about this loosely before, but I want to build keyboards. Like that's my sole mission, is to build keyboards, and I want to make really unique sounds. And that's it. Mm-hmm. And like you might meet somebody sophomore year who's like, yeah, my dad's an engineer and he has a way to build this and blah, blah, blah. But we're going to have to like put school aside and go do this thing. Well, guess what? Fucking go do it.
Yeah.
Because those opportunities don't come up all the time, and you can always go back to school.
Right.
But I'm not saying like everybody go drop out and go meet somebody. That's not what I'm saying. The point is, you need to follow your narrative and develop your own story. And just because there's these other paths being created and talked about, that doesn't have to be yours.
Well, I think it's, an issue of kind of maturing into yourself too. Like I feel like you reach a certain point in your young 20s where you stop being a people pleaser, because, if you're a high achiever, especially when you're young, you're always trying to please somebody. You're trying to please your parents. You're trying to please your teachers. You're trying to please your professors. You're trying to please your mentors, But I feel like one of the hardest things to do, when you're coming of age is to put yourself first. And a lot of students don't have that instinct. So it seems like you've always had that instinct. But I do have a problem with I like to over deliver, and customer service 101, right? Like if there's somebody I'm doing work for, or my relationships and with people, like I feel guilty if I don't call you enough, right? Because I'm like, I feel bad. Like maybe I'm not talking to him enough, or whoever it might be. Like I have that, but that's an Italian thing too, I think. Yeah, but yeah, I think you touch on a really good point. At the end of the day, the only person you have to answer to is yourself. And if you're not happy and you're not working towards a goal that's specifically yours, or that you fully believe in, could be that you're working for a greater organization. Like you guys are working together for a greater organization that you've created. So if it's not your goal or something that you're super vested in, you're never going to care enough to execute that to its full potential. So I think figuring that out of, all right, these are my just action items of, all right, I have 3 short-term goals. I have 5 long-term goals. And these are the steps I'm going to take to get to these is super important. I think there's a flip side to that coin, though. how do you know if you're truly unhappy or if you're just being lazy?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Because
That's a tough
I could
one.
think back of moments in my life where I felt really frustrated and unhappy in the moment, but I knew I needed to get this action item done. So it's like, when do you know, like, oh, am I screwing myself over or am I just paying my dues?
Honestly, I feel like laziness, this might be a controversial take, but I feel like people are only lazy about things that they don't really give that much of a shit about.
Yeah. No, I would agree
If
with
you
that.
care about it, you're not really going to be lazy about it. You know this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I feel like sometimes that's the case, but people are self-sabotaging, as well. How do you know if you're just a self-sabotager and you don't want to do this because it feels shitty in the moment, compared to,
That's
am I on
a
the right
practice
path?
thing.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think that's like you do it enough times and you screw up enough times that you start to recognize a faulty pattern. And then when you're in those moments, because I've been in this before, where it's like, all right, I know what this path is. I've been down this road before, and I know if I sleep on this and I get lazy about it, it's not going to get done, or it's going to get done half-assed at the last minute. So once I recognize, okay, pattern has ignition to that pattern,
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, break now. But the only way you realize stuff like that early is if you screw up enough times and you go down that path enough times. So it's time.
And Nick, we've talked about, the concept of a risk-averse individual versus a risk-taking individual, and where Domenico and I are good examples of this, where, and obviously we overlap in some areas, but I was generally risk-averse. I said, it kind of sounds silly. It's like, well, if you want to be a doctor, that's certainly not an easy thing to get into. But if you put the work in at the beginning, you're pretty much, there's going to be a job waiting for you. If you do medical school, there's going to be a doctor job or a research job or an industry job that's there for you.
Right.
And there's a path that's set up, and it's many years, and there's a lot of work again at the beginning. But then there's something waiting for you. There's generally an expectation that you're going to be working. Whereas Domenico had taken a different path, whereas he said, I am going to put myself out there and I'm going to try a couple of different things, none of which are guaranteeing me that outcome. I might be self-employed. I might be trying to make it in an industry like music, where having a college degree or having any type of degree doesn't necessarily matter.
Right.
And there are obviously people that are in between, and we're all in between in some ways. But do you generally find that in your endeavors that you're a risk-averse person or you're a risk taker, and do you work with people who are on different ends of that spectrum, and in music also?
Yeah, I could definitely speak to that. I'm definitely more down for a risk. My partner Danny in Disco Fries is 100% more in your boat. He's risk adverse, and I think if he wasn't in music, I feel like I kind of I pushed him to the dark side a little bit, because we started having success relatively early, and I was like, no, I promise you can make money on your own. You'll be okay. But I think he'd be highly, highly skilled. He'd probably be doing engineering somewhere crazy and building rockets.
Wow.
He's super smart. But that said, that's why we have a really good partnership, because he is the balance and I'm much more let's try anything. I'm throwing sparklers in the air and seeing what's going to land on my face. Some things are great and some things aren't.
And we tell our college students, you and the parents of our pre-college students, that you need to know. You might not need to know what you're getting into if you're going to be an engineer or you're going to be a musician or whatever, but you better know if you're a risk-averse person or a risk-taking person, because that's going to matter. Because there are certain careers where there is not that clear path. And so if you want a guaranteed job after college and a guaranteed this or that, then maybe the music industry, or at least marketing yourself as a musician, is not going to be that path.
No.
You might want to go into music engineering, or you might want to go into orchestral music, but there's not going to be that. There's not going to be that.
Yeah.
Path. So we tell our students at least recognize in what types of person, and you might be again in the middle of those extremes, but you need to recognize what kind of person you're going to be, because some careers are just not compatible.
And
Absolutely.
Shameless plug for the organization. This conversation never happens with a traditional high school counselor, never happens with a traditional college counselor. If you're a risk-adverse person versus a risk taker, if you're someone who works better with others versus works better on your own, these personality development conversations need to happen at a young age. And we have these conversations with our students so that they can ultimately know themselves by the time they graduate college. Because I feel like we're facing an identity crisis amongst my generation, at least. People are so interested in pleasing everyone around them, and social media plays into this as well, which is why I want to get into social media marketing. But it's like, no one takes the time to even figure out what they want anymore. And I feel like it's a failure of the school system, and it's a failure of mentors and counselors not being able to really get that out of their student. So,
well, I think yes. I wish on our podcast I have like the explosion thing, and I want to hit that right now, because amen to that. Yeah. I mean, even if I had the same path, but I had support in high school around me, what I wanted to do, I think I would have been way further along. I think today I would be like way further along as a result of that support. My guidance counselor in high school literally told me one person applied to Berkeley and nobody's ever got in from this school. You need backup schools, and what's your backup career? And I was like, this is what I'm doing. My mom was in the meeting and she like didn't know what to do. Yeah. And the counselor was like, you need to have a backup plan and you need backup schools, and we need to apply to like 5 schools. And I was like, no, I'm applying to 1 school. And she's like, well, nobody's ever gotten in there and only 1 person applied. Like, it's probably not going to happen. And I was like, no, it's going to happen. But that's all I'm doing. And by the way, they don't require SATs and I'm not taking them. And like my mom and I left the meeting and she's like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. But anyway, I kind of hacked that system a little bit. But the point was like, instead of saying like, hey, I don't understand what you're into, but tell me about it. Let's figure out a plan and let me figure out who I can dial you into that knows about what you're into and connect those puzzle pieces a little bit to support it. It was more like, I don't know, your plan sounds weird to me, so you should go to this plan.
Yeah.
It's like,
tell me about
that. What you guys are doing is so important. I can't stress it enough. And I was not paid for this endorsement, but it's so important that schools dial into what you're doing. And this service is so priceless that it's literally going to change the world.
And the thing that I always tell people is, it's not like we invented some magical, like, it's not like we have some patent on like a really interesting invention that we're selling. Like, all we're doing is listening to students. We're able to unpack what they want out of life, and we help them to get there. It's not this backwards dystopian relationship you have where you're constantly trying to fit in a box that doesn't even exist your whole life. And then you get to a point when you're in your mid-20s and you recognize that it was all a game anyway. We're trying to circumvent that harsh reality that so many students have found themselves in now. So it's really just about, I feel like the running theme of this whole episode is just trusting yourself, even when other people don't, see the big picture.
I don't want to like diminish. It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. Like, it's hard to sit by yourself and objectively say, when the world is telling you like, that's a bad idea. Why would you do that? Blah, blah, blah. You have to like get to a place in your head, which takes a lot of time and practice and meditation and sitting with yourself and working to say, okay, I'm confident in this decision. This is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And like, I think to boil it down and say like, you just need to do this it trivializes it quite a bit, because yourself, Domenico. I mean, you both know how hard it is to sit with yourself and be confident in something when the world is telling you that's why would you do that?
Yeah. I'm thinking about you, Anthony, too. When you were a medical student, it's one of the hardest challenges a person could take on is getting a medical degree. And at the same time, you invented a mentorship program in Newark that was flourishing. You were writing books. You were starting a Real World Academy with me. And I remember us discussing, people critiqued you for doing so many things at once. It's like you're becoming a doctor. Why are you running around doing all of these other things too? But you stuck to your guns and you recognize that this is a passion. This is important to me. This kind of fits into my legacy as a whole. So maybe you can speak on that some more and find out, what worked for you.
Yeah, my feeling was I realized that towards in medical school that they said, well, what have you accomplished in your life? And I'll show my resume. And it says, well, those are just a bunch of things. When I'm gone, that resume disappears. And what's important to me is that I helped people, and that certainly doesn't show up on a resume. But then I enjoyed helping people in as many ways as possible. And to what degree you can help people as a medical student is a bit limited. But I realized that we can help these high school students who were looking up to us and were really struggling. We can help them right now. There was something that immediately we could do. And to the degree with writing was the same thing. People. I realized I enjoyed writing. People liked to read what I wrote, and I got into that as well. And so this, the most common question: well, why do you do that? If you're a doctor, why do you do writing? If you're a doctor, why are you doing education? It's like, but why should I not? What does it have to do with me being a doctor that I can't do those things? So that's something maybe innately I didn't understand. Maybe I just don't understand that. But I think people should do things differently. Domenico is trying to make it as a musician, and yet he's doing education. Well, they don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, but he's doing great in both things. So why should he say just all of a sudden quit because it doesn't fit in that box of musician? It doesn't, it doesn't make sense.
Well, to me. So I think, and I think, all of this has been made possible by the internet and by, the rise of social media and the ability to kind of brand yourself and market yourself. But one thing we've realized in recent years is there are good ways of going about that and there are bad ways of going about that. And I feel a lot of concern for young people today, including myself, because their whole lives are broadcasted on social media from the time they're 10, 12 years old in some cases. So, how can you grow into yourself and, develop that level of confidence that we talked about that's necessary to, thrive in the real world if every step of the way your life has been documented on social media? So I almost want to warn the next generation to, be very cognizant of that, because it not only affects your college applications or your job applications, it affects your reputation as a whole. So Nick, I know, your business thrives because of, your engagement on the internet. How have you been able to develop a strong brand, both personally and professionally, and avoid those pitfalls?
Well, there's a few different things here to unpack. And I think controversial take, like, kids are kids, man. And this comes down to parenting.
Yeah.
Like, my wife and I do not put our kids on the internet. Like, that goes for pictures of them looking fucking adorable that I would love the world to see, to anything. Like, there's people just putting out pictures and pictures, which is fine, but just know that you're then teaching them to put anything out there. And it's like, that's going to be a learned habit as part of their life.
And when they're 15, 16, maybe they don't want pictures of them drooling on some plate when they're 4 years old.
Yeah, I just don't think that's fair to them. Yeah. If you do it, cool, whatever. It's not my cup of tea. And I think it's just something to stop, pause, and think about, right? Like, what is the purpose of you putting that picture up? There's one picture of my daughter. That's it, when she was first born. And I was like, I can't not put this on my feed right now. But like, that was self-serving. I was very aware that it was self-serving, and amen. But just know that, like, I think there's value in stopping. It's I think I heard this from George Clooney. He's like, before you put anything on the internet, stop for 30 seconds and think about the reason why.
Yeah.
And it was about Twitter, which, if everybody did that, the world would be a better place. But I think that goes for anything social driven, is like, why am I putting this out there? Like, what is the intent? What am I doing it for me? Is there something of value in this that brings to other people? If like, look, you're only friends with certain people on Facebook and they're all family and you think the value is they all want to see that photo, then fine. I guess you could justify it that way, but why not just text it to everybody?
Right. Right.
This is a totally different conversation that we should put to the side for now. I think the point you're making about a footprint that you're leaving is super important. And if you're in school, literally every moment that you put online will be there forever. That is all you need to know.
So now that we got that warning out of the way, which I think is really important, from a business perspective, I also want to give students advice, because I feel like a lot of our student base, does, work in the arts or wants to do something creative at some level in their professional lives. So
Right.
How have you best been able to utilize social media and utilize the internet from a business perspective? And what's required of that? How much content do you have to put out? How careful do you got to be with content creation? What's maybe your top 3 pieces of advice for people doing business on social media?
So the things that have resonated the best for us have not been like the plugs for records or, certain things that are just like centric around songs, even though that's our core of the brand of Disco Fries and what we are. The things that have resonated the most for fans have been like the personal things that we put up there. It could be me like cooking spaghetti with a Disco Fries record on in the background, and that will get more engagement. And me talking about that and how I grew up in an Italian household and blah, 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 will get way more engagement, and people care about a lot of it a lot more because it's personal.
Yeah.
It's true. They resonate with me as a human, and it's not just go check out my song.
Right.
So that would be my first piece of advice, is keep it as true to you as possible. And if you're putting yourself out there as the brand of so-and-so, the painter, or so-and-so, the music artist, and it's your personal name, and it's not like, somebody wearing a mask or an alias or whatever, make it true to you. Make it something that's sustainable. If it's you as an artist, talk about you as a human. Like, people want to know that story.
Right.
If Pablo Picasso had made artwork in 2021, people would literally want a live feed of his studio at all times on Twitch. So think about it in that context. Like, what are the things from like the classic artists, the Beethovens, the Mozarts, the Sinatras, the Beatles, that you'd want to see that doesn't exist? What does that content look like?
Well, one of my most successful posts on social media is when I was plugging our song Forever Love, and I posted that demo of me singing it to myself at like 3:00 in the morning when I was like singing super out of tune and I was messing up the chords, but I wanted to show people the evolution of the song. It's like it went from this little idea that I did in my bedroom to, a radio charting song. So, opening yourself up.
And that was hard to do. I'm sure that was hard for you to post.
Hell yeah, it was hard for me to post. But, it's important to kind of open yourself up as an artist. And, I feel like a lot of times people with creative personalities can be very guarded because they want to express themselves through their music, not, through their words or their personality. But it's important to, be able to show that side of yourself, because people do appreciate it.
Can you imagine if John Lennon had an iPhone and recorded voice memos of those records? Can you imagine listening to how fucking amazing that would be?
Yeah.
Like, the idea of the rough and like the process is almost better than the ultimate.
It's cool now.
art.
It's right. You're right. I feel like the internet has exposed that. We went through, I think, an era in popular music and popular culture where everything had to be polished and, super refined. But now, Driver's License is another example. The new song that just blew up, Driver's License. The fact that started as kind of a DIY project and ended up blowing up on TikTok made it what it is now. So, yeah, I guess
it's hard to do to the kind of, put a caveat on all of this. It's very difficult to do. And like, I have to give myself this advice, and you gave yourself the same advice with the Forever Love thing. It wasn't easy to do. We just launched a new Twitch show every Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
There you go.
And our new Twitch show started, I mean, it's getting better every week, the production value. But I was talking to my buddy about it. I'm like, yeah, there were a couple of beta test episodes that there were things that were like went haywire. And he's like, please just leave them alone. Like, don't take them down. And it was for the same reason. It's like, all right, when we're 300 episodes in, it'll be awesome to go back and watch how it started.
Yeah.
And see that process of evolution and development and kind of working out the kinks. And I think there's something that's super inspiring to other artists that makes it accessible and real. And it gives them a sense of like comfort knowing that other people go through the same path and struggle, and there's a refinement.
It's so hard to do, though. It's so hard. And I feel like I've learned this from you. Like, I'm not totally proud of all my music that's online that I made when I was 16, 17 years old. You know, I could easily wipe that from my catalog and just have things that I put out in the past year or two. And a lot of people do make the choice to do that. But, you know, number one, I feel like artists aren't the best judges of themselves. And, you know, somebody else might appreciate something that I had done, even if I don't. That's the first point. And the second point is, you know, you do have to come to terms with your artistic catalog. I feel like, you know, we are so quick to be so critical of ourselves. And if I was so micromanaging, and if I was such a perfectionist about all of the music I put out, then I wouldn't have, I have 30 songs collectively released. That's 3 albums worth of material, if you really think about it. That's 3 full studio albums worth of material that I have published. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't kind of force myself into putting myself out there. And, you know, how do you get past that state of paralysis? And how do you force yourself to expose yourself to the world, even when you're not necessarily totally confident?
Yeah, it's a process, and it's definitely a learned skill. And, you know, every artist, I feel like at some level wants every piece of work to be as perfect as it possibly can. But over time, and as you release more, you're able to come to terms with things like, all right, this hi-hat is fine. It'll be okay. I just had this conversation. We run a site we launched this year called finishmytrack.com. The idea of the site is, if you've got records that are at like 70%, but you can't get it the last 30% of the way, we'll help you take it the distance. Whether that's like you have temp drums in that need to be swapped out and you can't get the drums right, or the synth isn't quite right in the drop. We'll swap it out and help you get it retail ready. But a lot of the conversations I have repeat themselves with new artists, and they're along these lines where they get hung up on like a sound or a section, and sometimes we'll change that and make it better. But then like they'll listen to it for a week and they'll be like, no, it's still not right. And it's less about it being right or wrong, and it's more about them just having ear fatigue. Yes. And then being tired of hearing the same thing over and over. So they want it to change for the sake of changing. So I think, to your point, realizing what actually needs to be changed and what you want to change for the sake of changing, and differentiating those two things is super important.
Well, that's tremendous business advice too. That's not just, you know, for music people who are listening. You know, if you're in a business situation, you have to meet deadlines, you have to set goals, you have to, you know, show measurable progress. Otherwise, you'll just stay in this state of limbo forever. You know, that's kind of the difference between amateurs and professionals. Amateurs will have crazy ideas and, you know, want to do 20 different things, but the professional will actually be able to execute that on a timeline. So you got to just force yourself into doing that.
Yeah, and like I said, it's practice.
Yeah.
These things are all practice and time. And like the idea that it's just going to come to you tomorrow, maybe it'll click, But the more you do it, the easier it gets to make those decisions and ultimately finish something and get it out. Whether that's finishing a piece of content for social media that you need to do that is going to be like your plan, or that's finishing a song or finishing a piece of art, whatever it might be, the more you execute, finish, release, it's going to become easier to do it moving forward.
Right. Yeah, it's really just about putting in the hours. There's no real way around it. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We're approaching the end of the discussion, and we're introducing a new Q&A section of the Keeping It Real podcasts, where our most loyal listeners get a chance to ask our guests a question.
Love it.
We got quite a few questions here. Maybe we'll do 2 or 3 to wrap up the episode. Here's a good one.
Where do you guys source these from? Or you source these just like on Instagram?
On
and
Instagram,
stuff?
yeah. So we got these responses back from some of our listeners on Instagram, both from staff and students. So this first one is from our friend Ramiro. How can young musicians break out in an industry that seems oversaturated with content and new talent coming out every day?
The $1 million question.
Literally, yeah.
There's 60,000 songs coming out every day. That's straight from Daniel Ek and Spotify. So with that said, everything we just discussed about being true to yourself, putting yourself out there, is more important than ever. Because you're going to put out a song, right? So are 59,999 other people on that day. So what's going to be the differentiator? The differentiator is going to be you and all of the pieces of content around you that drive to that song. I'm sorry about my dog barking at the door. So I talked about like how people engaged with me cooking pasta and playing one of our songs in the background, but maybe you have some other crazy hobby that you like to do. So film that, talk about it, have the song behind it. It's so easy to do this on TikTok. You literally could walk around. Domenico could walk around New York City right now and be like, these are my top 5 pizza places. Boom, boom, boom. He hits them all and he throws his record in the background. Now you get tons of engagement because people, number one, care about New York. Everybody cares about New York. Everybody cares about pizza places in New York. And they want to know you're interesting as a person, so they watch it. Mm-hmm. That goes viral. But the song is the backdrop of all of that. And TikTok drives Spotify directly. So you're going to get click-throughs to that record right there.
I feel like most people will hear this advice and try it twice and it won't work out and then they'll stop. So how do you tell people to keep doing it?
Repeat that over years of content.
Yeah.
And this is a law of averages business. The idea that you could drop an album and blow up is just put that out of your mind. It doesn't exist like that. This is a singles-driven law of averages. The more you put out, the more it snowballs, the more your chances of success on a greater level. But also, don't negate the fact that you're building catalog. You're building content. Mm-hmm. Like, all of that content has value.
So I'm going to pause you right there just because this directly ties into our next question. This is from our friend Kobe. It'd be interesting to hear about perseverance in the industry. What are some of the obstacles you've faced throughout your career as a musician, and how did you work through them?
They don't go away. I'll tell you that much. Mm-hmm. They only get bigger and they change. So
what have some of your obstacles been?
Number one, I operate from a Rocky mentality. I love the underdog position. I actually enjoy, it's sick, but I enjoy the losses more than the wins sometimes because
Italian neuroticism. Yeah.
I love figuring out how to navigate around them. It's like, if we have a big successful record, I'm like, this is amazing. But if somebody turns down, like if we send out a record to labels and they all turn it down, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, how do I figure out, like, all right, what's going to be the plan? And how do you figure out how to navigate around all of that pushback?
Right.
So I think part of this is that's innately me, and it's not everybody. That some people would hear that and be like, "Oh God, that sounds terrible."
Right.
But I think it comes back down to one thing, and you have to know yourself. You have to know what your goals are, and you have to get to a place where you're confident. When everybody says no, you find that path of yes, and that takes a lot of time, and it does take perseverance, and it takes eating a lot of shit from people.
Yep.
But if you're confident in your craft, and not just you're confident, but you see there's windows of like, all right, I got co-signed by a big artist. Like that doesn't happen unless you're making a lot of noise and your shit is really good.
Right.
So you start seeing all these paths open up. And as long as you're getting to a place where you know that your music can get out there the right way, ultimately, and it might be in 5 years, you have to work towards that 5-year mark.
Yeah.
But you have to be comfortable with that.
So I want to ask 2 more questions because they're really good questions. Did you / do you have a mentor that has helped you navigate the industry? And how do you remain authentic to your visions when your art is also your income?
This is a good one. Well, it's definitely 2 different questions.
Yeah.
So I've definitely learned there have been like a tremendous amount of people that I've learned from over the years in the music business. We had a manager that we worked with for a long time who I learned a tremendous amount from by the name of Mark Petrico, and he was awesome. But we grew to a place where it was just the balance was off, and we got just to a place where we were moving in a different direction, and that relationship didn't make sense anymore at that time. But there have been tons of situations like that where we'll know somebody or we'll work with somebody for a period of time, and then the relationship just grows in different directions. We might not be compatible for them anymore for whatever reason.
Right.
So I've tried to just take the best out of all of those people and situations and just add it to my bank of tools. And it's kind of like if you were a craftsman and you did woodwork and you worked for all these different companies, and every company you went to, you like picked up a different tool. They gave you some other tool to whittle wood with. And then at the end, you were like, I'm doing this myself and I'm going into business. And you had this fucking dope collection of wood tools that you made like the coolest pieces of furniture with. That's what I feel like I have in my brain from all the different people that I've worked with. So if I had to pinpoint one person, it would be impossible. But there's definitely people like working with you is tremendous. And I know it's been framed in more of like a mentor-mentee situation with me and you, but I look at it like a partnership. Like I get just as much out of you as you hopefully get out of me. And I love that type of working relationship. Yeah,
no, me too, man. And I think this directly ties in. How do you not compromise your artistic vision when you're also trying to, get business done?
I mean, there's 2 ways to look at the music business and making music your thing. And art in general, I feel like you can either take the path of like, I'm doing one thing, this is going to be the only music or art that I make, and hopefully the market loves it eventually and I make it a career. Or you are a little malleable. And like DJing, for instance, if you go to a club and you just play everything that's self-serving, it might work.
Probably not.
But it probably won't work.
Yeah.
So we do the mentality of one for them, one for us. It's like, this record's for them because we know they love it. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff in it that we love too, but really it's for them. And the next one's for us. And I think that you could think of creation that way too, is like, give the people what they want sometimes. It's okay. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's going to feel good when you get the reaction from them back to it. And I'm not saying don't be self-serving with your art and not compromise or whatever, all that stuff. Like, I think that there's a way for them both to exist together.
No, I totally agree. And that's how I have tried to navigate the industry as well. I'm seeing that I keep telling you that we have one more question. I'm seeing another one just came in. Do you have time for one more, Nick?
Go, man.
Okay. So we'll leave
it's
it off.
It's a nice day, and I should be drinking rosé on my porch, but I'm with you indoor kids, and I'm with it.
Yeah,
it's
you're not an indoor kid. You're just another Italian only child like us.
I know, and these lights couldn't get any darker.
All right, we'll make this a quick one. It's kind of a fun one from Ariel. Do you have a favorite genre of music, and what would you say has been most inspirational to you in your creative process of making music? Let's just say lately. Do you have a favorite genre lately, and what has been inspiring you most that's been going on?
Like in the music space or just in general?
In the music space, yeah. What do you like nowadays?
So genre-wise, I'm all over the place. Like, I listen to everything. It really just depends. Like, I wake up and listen to, like, it's Sunday, so Italian House Party is the best possible radio show on Sundays. It goes for like 4 or 5 hours, and all it is like 50s to 70s classic like Rat Pack mob hits, and it's amazing. But I usually like wake up with stuff like that, and then by the middle of the day, I'm listening through like all the Liftoff demos and dance music full on, and then I'll listen to hip hop in my car. So I'm a little all over the map.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same. I'm the same exact way. All right,
I have ADD when it comes to music. I'm just like, I'm tired of this record. Like, go into something else. Like, I need to bounce around because it also gives me ideas for other shit.
Yeah, I totally feel that. Well, look, thanks, man, for coming on the show. I think this was one of our best episodes. I really enjoyed this conversation. We'd love to have you back if you have the time. But
I'd love to come back and do it again and do like a longer format.
Yeah.
And I know you're jumping on our show. I don't know when is this airing?
This will be airing, I believe, in late April, so a few weeks from now. Yeah.
Okay. So you guys might have already tuned in to Domenico on our show by then.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, talk soon. Thanks for coming on, and we'll catch up later.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Keeping It Real podcast by Real World Academy. If you're a student looking for a mentor or a parent looking to help your kid design a happy life and a successful career, visit our website at realworldacademy.org and subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and wherever you listen to podcasts to hear more exclusive content on how to design your future.